Welcome to Phazon Labs, powered by World 1-1 and sponsored by nobody, but it could be sponsored by you. So if this is your jam, you should totally get a hold of us, and we'll talk. We can do stuff. Let us know. Have your people talk to our people. I am, as always, your host, Larry the Bearded Wonder. Joining me is my companion bounty hunter, Isabel Bramman.
Hello.
And this is Phazon Labs. This is World 1-1 Network's premier Metroid show. This week, we're going to be taking a look at something related but slightly off our usual beaten path. So this week, we're getting a little more informative. I won't say instructional, but informative is probably the right word here. Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a look at kind of breaking down and dissecting the Metroidvania genre as a whole and kind of its component parts and pieces that make it what it is. So I was telling Isabel before we hit the record button that I had some thoughts. I've had some thoughts. I kind of have like a system that I keep in my head for evaluating and kind of picking apart games in the Metroidvania genre. And I cracked out a couple of sheets of paper and a pen, and Eddie came to visit today from my fellow compatriot from World 1-1, and we had a nice conversation, and I laid it all out on paper. He goes, okay, that makes a lot of fucking sense. Mm-hmm. So in any case, I kind of wanted to get into it, but first, before we dig deep here, Isabel, to you, what makes a Metroidvania game a Metroidvania game?
Well, I'd say like the very basic elements of it is that you have a world, and then you go to one area of the world and you encounter an obstacle that you can't get past. So you go back to a previous area of the world that you've explored, and then you explore a little more, and then you discover something, whether that's a new power-up or something else like that. And then you're able to kind of put together that, with this new power-up, I can go further than I could in that previous area, so you have to backtrack, and then you're able to move forward. And that's kind of like the very basic core element, I feel, of a Metroidvania. And it's kind of like, it depends on how kind of expansive you can get and like how much you put into it. But I think the main thing is the world of a Metroidvania and how you explore that world, if that makes sense. I mean,
it does.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to kind of talk in a little bit broader strokes here. Mm-hmm. I'm just realizing the camera angle for my camera for this video call, which nobody sees the video on this, just makes my gesticulation look ridiculous because it puts my hands right up front. Mm-hmm. But anyways, so besides laughing at my own absurdity here, so kind of in broad terms, this is kind of what I've taken to using to explain and defining a Metroidvania game. And yes, I'm one of those people that says that the term should stay. Doesn't need to be changed or reinvented. It stays because it's effective at explaining what it is. Mm-hmm. In the sense that, for me, the definition of a Metroidvania game is any game that contains all, not some, all the components that are in the center section of a Venn diagram of Metroid and Castlevania. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking like the Metroid, not the linear stage level based Castlevanias, but Symphony of the Night and all the other ones that fall into that half of the Castlevania family tree. Just for clarification for anybody that wants to nitpick the subject with me. So for the sake of clarity, but yeah, so a Metroidvania game is any game that contains all those components that are in the center section of that Venn diagram. From there, here's where I think all the different games in the genre start to kind of find their own unique blend and feel and personality, if you will, or identity even. So, from there, there's a few sliders in my mind that I kind of look at and go, how did the developers adjust and shift these sliders and where do they sit? So for me, first one is, are we looking at a game, there's the slider where on one end or one extreme is mobility platforming. On the other is combat. And a really good example of that, honestly, is I would use the two Ori games. So Ori 1, that slider was way more towards mobility, platforming. But with Ori 2, that slider moved more towards the combat side considerably. You also kind of had that with
Axiom Verge.
Yeah. So, because the first one very combat heavy, the second one leans much more into mobility and exploration, which also kind of brings me to the next slider. Because when it comes to Metroidvanias, you typically have your focus one of two places. One end of the slider, ranged combat. The other end, melee, close quarters combat. So, you see, and very few games in the genre are going to have that slider all the way to one side or all the way to the other side. Because, even if like your main character's primary weapon is a sword, there's probably still some secondary ranged options in there, but you're obviously leaning much more heavily towards melee close quarters, or vice versa, where, if you've got some sort of projectile weapon as your primary means of combat, you might have a secondary short range, close quarters melee type thing going on. But, that slider, depending on where it sits, gives a very different feel to that individual game. And then the next one would be whether you're looking at for like your equipment and weapons and item management and all that. You've got on one end of the slider, very RPG style menu heavy management, or on the other end, you've got basically like automatic management where you pick something up, it's just integrated and you fucking go, as opposed to, like Time Spinner, for example, where all the weapons and everything and all the gear is all stuff that you have to manually go into a menu, make changes, adjust, and manage yourself, giving it that much more menu heavy RPG feel to the upgrade item and weapon management. So, and then the last slider on my scale, or on this list here on my mixer board, is whether you're looking at, on one side, again, very traditional RPG style, out in the open, stats and number crunching, or those hidden stats. So a really keen example here, honestly, would be looking at Castlevania as opposed to Metroid, where Castlevania, you swing at an enemy and you hit them and you connect, and you can see the numbers pop up over their head, the amount of damage you did. You know, that's visible, shown stats. That's out in the open. You can essentially, you know, mentally crunch the numbers and do the math yourself on, you know, what's going on there. Versus in Metroid, those stats are there, but they're all behind the scenes. You never see the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for most games in the genre, not all, but most, there's a kind of periphery flavor slider of whether you're looking at fantasy or sci-fi. It's not a strict hard and fast, but it tends to lean towards one or the other with the genre. You don't usually get a whole lot that deviates out of that, which is interesting and honestly a gap in the market that I think could be and should be filled.
Mm-hmm.
But that's me. That's kind of my mental breakdown here. I'm curious to hear your take on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I was thinking as you were talking about this, I was going through Kickstarter because I had backed the hand-drawn game guides, R.I.P.
Right.
And
shout out to Phil Summers for being fucking awesome, though.
Yeah. And I saw that there was a game that was coming out called Crowsworn.
I cannot wait. It looks so good.
And I was mentally kind of going through your checklist as I was, as you were talking about it, kind of comparing it to Crowsworn from what I saw from the trailers and stuff like that. And unfortunately, when I saw it, it was already backed and stuff, so I didn't get to back it at all. But it seems like as though it's kind of like in the middle when it comes to like the combat, is that you have like a scythe, but you also have like a gun and like magic. So it's like right in the middle of like the combat one.
Right.
And but it's also like in the sense of like some of the other ones, it's more fantasy one instead of sci-fi. It's got the less the RPG elements, I think, from what I saw. And yeah, it's definitely leans more towards Castlevania and like in terms of like visual style than like Metroid. But yeah, no, as you were talking about it, I was thinking about Crowsworn through that, and that game looked quite promising, so I'm excited for that. But
oh, indeed.
Yeah. So I do like the idea of it being broken down into kind of not digestible parts, but like categories that you can kind of, what's the word?
You can kind of pick apart and dissect.
Yeah. Like with Metroid, like the combat is more ranged, but like with Samus Returns, they added a melee counter. So, and that kind of thing. So, and it, yeah, no, I definitely agree with the Venn diagram kind of thing, that a lot of the more modern Metroidvanias take kind of the best of both worlds and kind of create their own sort of mix of the two. So, yeah. No, I definitely agree with that.
I say, I can only imagine you're sitting there listening and going, holy fuck, this makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I almost am thinking that like this would be a good like way to teach how to make a Metroidvania in the sense like in like a game
in terms of game design.
Yeah, like a game design class almost. And because like if you look at it and like are able to compare it like that, then it would be a way to kind of mix and match and be like, oh, I want it to be a little more combat focused in terms of ranged combat. Okay, well, how do you do that? And then I want it to be more fantasy. So if you want ranged combat and fantasy, how would you go about that? So
Right.
yeah. So that's an interesting way to go about that. Yeah. No, I feel like as though if you put like together some sort of like sheet or something like that, that would be very helpful for a lot of people.
So I was actually thinking about it because there's a project I want to get into, but it's a little ways down the line, and it's going to be a rather sizable undertaking, if I'm being entirely honest here. So it's not one that I'm rushing headlong into, or that I think is going to kick off anytime like super soon. But I've had this idea that I would love to go through and play through every game in the genre. Like, I want to hit every goddamn one, right? But I feel like, aside from my own enjoyment, there could be some beneficial content put out there if, you had somebody that has actually gone through every one of the and can really kind of break down games in the genre with the most comprehensive comparison against other, every other game in said genre. And so I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, if I was to put this together for like a series of YouTube videos, if you will, for lack of a better thought at this very second, I'm like, this would make for like a great overlay when talking about it, where you could kind of use like a 1 to 10 scale for all these sliders and use it to visually kind of break down and explain the functional components of each game, so that if you're when your taste in the genre, that you could make sure that if you wanted to pick up a game, that it was going to be one that leaned towards your more specific likings in the genre. Like, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the more RPG heavy Metroidvanias. It doesn't, click those bells for me. It's not my thing. Now, there's some that are a few, that occasionally function as an exception to that rule a little bit, but on the whole, not so much. So, knowing what I'm getting into is nice for me. There's a reason that I love Metroid games, and while I don't hate Castlevania games, they're not nearly my go-to like Metroid games are. Because those Castlevania games lead more into that RPG heavy element that just doesn't do it for me. I don't like plucking through menus to change and adjust all my stuff all the damn time. That, for me personally, breaks the flow of gameplay. That said, there's one Castlevania in particular that really got its hooks into me for a good long while back in the day, was Dawn of Sorrow. And I don't know why that one specifically, but Jesus, I 100%ed everything in that damn game. So, but it's like the only one that really did that for me, and I have no idea why, but there it was.
Yeah, it would almost be like a comprehensive guide. It sounds like. Yeah. No, I like this idea a lot. That you would be able to go through and be like, I would like something that's a little more, like sci-fi. Well, here is your list. Yeah. No, I do like this. Yeah.
To be able to have that visual breakdown of those sliders kind of up on the screen, where you can be like, hey, if this is a style or a piece that you like, then this is probably going to be more your game, or this might not be the game in the genre for you, So, but yeah, no, it was just kind of a thought rattling around in the back of my head. But So on the back of this, though, I'm gonna use this opportunity to double down on something else, though, because we've talked about this on World 1-1 before, and I figure, you know what, this is the right venue to bring this up again. Is I'm gonna take this conversation back to our Venn diagram for a minute here.
Mm-hmm.
So on that Venn diagram in the middle, you know, you've got all the things that make a Metroidvania game a Metroidvania game. But for it to be a Metroidvania game, it has to have all those things. Because that's what defines it as such. But there's a lot of games out there, and more of them of late are coming out where they have most of those things, but there's a few things missing, like one or two kind of thing. And you're like, this is really close to a Metroidvania, but it's not quite because something's off. And I'll give some examples here. SteamWorld Dig 1, Kunai, Dead Cells. Those are Iconoclast as well. Dust and Elysian Tale, just as a handful of examples. Not that they are not fine games, because they are. I can't tell you how many hours I've put into SteamWorld Dig 1 and how many times I've bought it. We're not going to talk about the fact that I've like quintuple dipped on that game. Shush, don't tell. No, legit, I have at least 5. But they've got some of the inherent DNA of the genre, but not all the pieces. So here's what happens. What you have here is a subgenre, and I have officially identified it. I have defined it, and in case anybody missed it, that definition is a game that has the majority or most of those center Venn diagram components, but not quite all. Like a couple are missing. We call that a microvania.
I almost wonder as though like there needs to be like a third circle in your Venn diagram with
who's the third circle?
Like with the in terms of the microvania, and because like if we narrow it down even more, maybe to.
You almost can't, though, because the problem is with a microvania, the one or two, or you know, the couple of components that are missing that would make it a full Metroidvania are not necessarily always the same from one microvania to the next.
Oh,
it's
true.
just that it's missing a couple, not which specific couple are missing, which allows for a great deal of variety and experimentation with microvanias as a subgenre, because they're not all going to be the same, because some of them go, we want these parts, but our game isn't about like this one or two parts, so we'll leave those out. So if all the microvanias were only just those, it would all be exact, but it's a little broader than that, because every one of them is still really close. It's only missing one or two things. It's just a question of which one or two things are you missing.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah. So like with Dead Cells, for example, that one is a microvania because it's a Metroidvania, but it also has roguelike elements to it, right?
Not even. Because there is an actual full Metroidvania that is also a roguelike. Actually, it might technically be a roguelike. No, I think it would be a roguelike. But Dead Cells, one of the biggest pieces that it's missing, that's keeping it from being a Metroidvania, it does not have a full interconnected world map that you can completely traverse by the end of the game, you know, from start to finish. There's no real backtracking in it. There's no There's no big interconnected map. It has some kind of smaller biomes, but they don't have that level of interconnectivity between those biomes. And there's no elements of lock and key where you pass the lock, find the key, and then you're going back to the lock.
I see. So, like, the one that was a more true Metroidvania roguelike, is that Robot Named Fight?
Abso-fraggin-lutely it is.
Yes, okay. That's the one that I still need to play.
Oh, it's so super good.
I know.
And that's a game where, it's a roguelike. You start fresh with a whole brand new randomized map every time. But that randomized map carries that level of interconnectivity, backtracking, lock and key setup that an actual Metroidvania game would have to it. It just rearranges and rebuilds the world and the items and power-ups and equipment that you'll find in the order that you'll find them in every time you start a new run.
I see it. So you would keep your items then when you die, basically. Sort of. The only roguelike I've ever played is Cadence of Hyrule.
Okay. So a Robot Named Fight actually takes kind of a unique approach on the subject of progression and saving. Because, save points are not typically a thing in any rogue game. But a Robot Named Fight actually makes consideration for the fact that it is as big as it is, being a Metroidvania, and the size and scope of its map and its world to complete a run. So it has one-time use save points throughout the world map. So what happens is you're playing along, and oh, thank God, you've made it to a save point. Now, if you die, you'll go back to that save point, but then that save point is gone. It's no longer usable. It's a one-off. So if you die again before finding another one, your run's done. Now, on the other hand, if you're playing along and you're doing great and you find a save point, you hit that save point, and then you're playing along, you're doing great, and you find another one, now they're stacking. So if I remember correctly, so what would happen is if you died, you go back to the last save point that you hit, and then that one breaks down. It's gone. But die again, you go back to the one before it because you haven't used that up yet.
Interesting. So then you would be able to not have to repeat the run, basically.
Completely correct. So there is some accommodation. Plus, even though it is randomized, it does give you the option to actually note your favorite seeds and enter for a specific seed, so you can keep replaying the same map layout and randomized setup. So if you hit one that you really, really liked, you can totally, jot down your note of that seed's number, and you can plug it in and get the exact same run again to practice on if you want it.
I do like that idea. Yeah. Plus the saves to make things a lot more manageable, I feel.
But don't get me wrong, the game's still fairly tough.
Yeah.
But it's very good. And honestly, I think it's the only game that I am aware of that is an actual full, complete Metroidvania, but also in the rogue genre. Like, I know that Dead Cells bandied about the term Roguevania when that came out, back in 2018, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But for my money,
I think you're
a
right.
robot named Fight is the only true Roguevania, to my knowledge.
Yeah. That does sound much more like from what I've seen from Dead Cells, Dark Souls. Anyway, but yeah, the Dead
Don't
Cells.
Get me wrong, I love Dead Cells.
Yeah.
I've clocked way too many hours on Dead Cells not to love Dead Cells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I've got hundreds of hours of that nonsense clocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I love every bit of it. And God bless Motion Twin, by the way. Just shout out to Motion Twin for all the phenomenally good work they do in terms of continuing years later to support the hell out of that game for damn near no cost. Like, I think in all this time there's only been a maximum of 2 paid DLC packs that came from Motion Twin, and if I remember correctly, both of those packs were only like $5 a piece. And that's out of almost 20 DLC like updates and packs and everything else over the course of the last several years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, legit. They've done awesome stuff. And almost all of that DLC has hit every platform that it's been on. There was only one DLC pack in particular that I was honestly really interested in, and I wanted it on Switch, but just because of the particulars, I don't think it's ever coming to Switch, which makes me sad. Was they did an update. I won't call it a DLC pack, but it is an update. That's probably a more accurate description for most of what they've been doing, is like really good meaty updates over the years. But so they did an update where if I remember right, it was called like the Legacy update, because they've made so many changes and adjustments over the years. The Legacy update allowed you to backtrack your game's like updates to any particular version update that you liked best. So, like, you know, say an update comes out and it totally nerfs the stuff that you use for your build, for your run that you really like, and it just completely fucks your, you know, your style of gameplay over that you've been working on forever. The Legacy update would let you roll that back to before that happened and go back to playing the way you wanted it. The way that you liked or you were used to.
Oh, I do like that a lot. Yeah.
So,
because then that way, you know, it's not like you know, kind of like forced to accidentally upload some, or you know, like, you know, kind of like the Smash DLC where you're constantly trying to keep up with the patches and that kind of stuff. So
right, because all those tweaks and updates, especially for a multiplayer game like that, change the meta game so much all the damn time. So, you know, with Dead Cells, you don't really have that meta game going on, obviously, because there's no multiplayer in it. But, but that is a very, you know, run-heavy game, and so you get used to way certain items and weapons and whatnot work. And when you change and, you know, adjust and nerf and buff not only those, but sometimes even the rules around them, you know, that has a big impact. So being able to roll that back if you wanted for the sake of the player, you know, is nothing but a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it sounds like they were listening to people, almost like people were saying we want this but not that, and so it sounds like as though they took that to heart.
Oh yeah, and I mean they've been great about community feedback in general, because I mean they put in like all the update and patch notes every time, you know, what changes came about because of listening to community feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're listening to their player base very closely 3-4 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Which is absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for an indie game. That's nearly unprecedented.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, so that's kind of my like dissection and breakdown of the genre as a whole into its component parts and how how a game can play with the mix of those component parts and the balance of those in order to create its own individual personality, flavor, and identity in the genre. And I think that, knowing that information and being able to identify it helps people that enjoy, that genre like us and like most anybody listening to this, presumably, helps them better pick out and identify the games in that genre that they're going to like the most and get the most enjoyment out of.
Mm-hmm. And I think it can also help developers too,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think
Which,
all around,
if nothing else, my call out to all indie developers out there is, for the love of God, accurately label your games. If you've made a Microvania, do not call it a Metroidvania on the packaging, because if I pick up a game that says it's a Metroidvania and that's not what I'm getting, I'm not happy. But by the same token, if I'm looking for a Microvania, which I am sometimes, it'd be nice to know, it'd be nice to have that label on the box, so to speak, so that I could easily find what I'm looking for. So, don't get me wrong, I've found Microvanias that I really liked just because they were labeled as Metroidvanias. And, like I said, some of them were close, but it's not like they were trying to be a Metroidvania. They just didn't, there really wasn't another term to call it, besides that. And I'm like, there's enough of these out there that this should be clarified and correctly labeled and identified. So I decided, I'm like, I'm going to fix this problem. Here's the term that you need, that you've been looking for all your lives. It's a Microvania.
Yeah, I think that actually works pretty well. Is that it almost fits it, almost, but not quite. And plus, like, Microvania also has a nice ring to it as well. So yeah, I think that is a good way to look at it. So.
All right. Well.
Yeah.
In any case, I think that makes an excellent place to put a pin in the conversation for this week for our episode. I know it's not our normal Metroid pitch game episode this week, but you know what? This is probably the right audience that would appreciate a good meaty breakdown of the genre to be able to. Oh God, I don't know. It's kind of like the nerd equivalent of being a craft beer nut and knowing your craft beer. So, now for all you Metroidvania fans, you can tell the IPAs apart from the dark beer and all that shit. So, but in any case, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us this week. I want to thank my partner in crime, Isabel Bramman, for coming and hanging out with me.
Yeah.
Big shout out to our parent network, World 1-1. You can and should, as always, find us at our home at world11.podbean.com. All spelled out, all one word. You can catch Phazon Labs over on our Twitter. That's at Phazon Labs. You can also even drop us a line there. We do keep the DMs open. So if you have a Metroid game pitch that you want to share with the world, hit us up. Let us know. We'll be more than happy to have you on so that we can share that, workshop it, have some fun with it. And we'll see you all next week here at Phazon Labs. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night.
Peace.